I am glad you can make it to today's lesson. We are in the book of First Kings, chapter 17, and as you may recall from earlier lessons, the kingdom of Israel had broken up under Rehoboam's reign and had become the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. And what we have at this point is that each kingdom goes through a number of kings. For Judah, some of them are good, some of them are bad. For Israel, which is the 10 tribes and most of the people, all of the kings were bad. And during the time that follows, one of these bad kings is named Ahab. Now, what we find from the Bible is that Ahab was worse than the ones who came before him, and those guys have been pretty bad. So that's a warning to us that, all right, Ahab is not a good guy. And one of the things about him, as bad as he became worse because of who he married. There was a woman named Jezebel who was a Sidonian, meaning she came from the country of Sidon. In Sidon, they worshipped these false gods, the primary one being one called Baal. And this Baal was called the storm god. He was supposedly the one who would bring the rains and help plants grow as a result. And of course, in that part of the world where there's a lot of dry weather, people are quite interested in what rain they can get. Well, God had a prophet there named Elijah. Now, you may recall that a prophet is someone who works for God and gets direct instructions from God for what he's supposed to do. Well, Elijah is sent to go talk to Ahab, and Elijah tells Ahab, okay, from now on, there's not going to be any dew or any rain until I say otherwise. And he leaves. Well, Elijah, by this time, uh, isn't really listening to God's prophets or paying attention to God, because after marrying Jezebel, he'd set up and established Baal worship in Israel. So you see why God is planning to punish Israel in this way. And notice this, that God's punishment is going to show that this Baal is a false god, because he has no control over the storms. The real God has control over the storms and the rain. Well, Elijah is sent by God to a ravine to the east, and he is to live in that ravine. And the reason being is that there was a stream of water that ran through it, and that would give Elijah water when the rest of the country around him is struggling to find water. And then there's that little bit of extra that is often told in the stories, that God tells Elijah that he is going to send the ravens to bring Elijah food, specifically bread and meat, twice a day. So Elijah will not have to worry about what he eats or drinks. It will be provided for him. Now, I touch on this because often in children's lessons, there's this big to-do about the birds, the ravens, being sent to bring in food for Elijah. And usually that's just about all that's told about this, and not the reason why. So we're going into the reason why. Also, there is something a little bit odd in here, and I need to tell you this part because most people do not talk about this. When God was introducing certain rules to the Israelites, he declared certain animals as clean and other animals as unclean. So the clean animals were ones that the Israelites were allowed to keep and raise and eat and do things with. And then there were the unclean animals they weren't even supposed to touch. Well, ravens fell into the category of unclean animals. And so you think, wait, why would God use an unclean animal to bring Elijah food? Well, one of the people who could speak and read the Hebrew for this part of the Bible says that, you know, it may not have been birds, it may have been people living in that area who were called by a name that sounded a lot like ravens. And so it's entirely possible that God had instructed the people living in that area to provide Elijah with food. Okay, number of people support that, and that sounds like a very good idea and probably what happened. However, if God did decide to use an unclean bird to provide for Elijah, that would have been a little bit of a clue that things that were declared unclean back in the early days of the Israelites would one day not have that designation, meaning one day God would decide to make things that were unclean to be clean. And we do see that happen in the book of Acts, which comes in the New Testament, but that's a story for another day. All right, Elijah stays in this ravine and he has food and water up until the time that the water dries up. Well, that was not unusual for the type of ravine this was, where there would be water part of the year and then it would dry up for the other part of the year. So when this happened, God sends Elijah someplace else. And oddly enough, he sends Elijah to the country of Sidon. Yes, that's where Jezebel is from and where the people there worship Baal. Elijah gets there and we find that, oh, there's been a drought there too. So the real God doesn't control just Israel. He controls the whole world. Now we understand that now. People in that time thought, oh, well, there are lots of gods, and this God controls this country, and this other God controls this country, or this one controls the mountains, and this one controls the flatlands. No, what we find is the real God, the God of the Bible, controls it all. And in Sidon, it's all dry, and Elijah has been sent to this particular woman who's a widow, meaning her husband has died, and she has a young son. And when Elijah sees her, she's gathering sticks up, and he asks for some water, and she gives it to him. And then he asks that she cook some bread for him. And she confesses to him, we only have a little bit of flour and a little bit of oil for me to cook some bread for my son and me, and we're going to eat it and then die. Meaning that's the last bit of food that she has. And he asks her still to provide that for him. Well, she does. And that is a great act of faith on her part, especially since we don't know what her faith was. Some people try to say that she was following Baal, but we don't know that for sure. She may have actually known the real God. In any event, she provides this last bit of food for Elijah and takes him into her home, and Elijah lives there for quite some time. And when she goes back to the flour jar, she finds there's flour in it. She goes back to the oil jar, and there's oil in it, and it doesn't run out as long as Elijah's with her and until the rains return. So Elijah stays with her for quite a while, and during this time, her son actually falls sick and dies. And she goes to Elijah about it, and he prays earnestly to God and begs God to bring life back to her son, and God does that. So now, no matter what her background is on who she believed in, she definitely believes in the real God at this point. And Elijah is shown to have some stature to her. All right, a lot of times people will rush on to the next part of the story, But I'm going to close it off here because the next story is a big one, and I don't want to try to hurry that one up. What we learn from this particular lesson is that God is in control. There are things that happen that sometimes make us wonder, is God controlling this, or is God just not paying attention to this? And what we find out from this is that God is aware of everything that is going on, but his plans sometimes don't work the way we would want them to, because he has something much bigger in mind. And that's exactly what we will find out in the next lesson. So today's tie, I have a houndstooth tie on, and I'm wearing it because it looks like a lot of ravens taking flight. And so I thought that would be a good reminder to us of what is going on. All right, I will let you go. I hope you will make it back for the next lesson when we find out, what does Elijah do next? Hope to see you then. Bye.